Have you ever thought about how massive those battles must have been? Hold on to your helmets because the truth might surprise you. In popular culture, we often envision medieval battles as grand scenes of vast armies clashing with knights in shining armor, spanning fields as far as the eye can see. But the historical reality was quite different. To understand the true scale of medieval battles, we must delve into the logistical and strategic limitations of the time. Unlike modern armies, medieval forces lacked the sophisticated infrastructure to support large numbers of troops. Let's start by looking at the challenges they faced. Section 1: Logistical challenges. Feeding, equipping, and sheltering an army was a Herculean task. The agricultural output of the medieval period was limited, and transporting large quantities of food was difficult. Soldiers often had to forage or rely on local resources, which restricted the size and mobility of armies. The challenges of supply and logistics are evident in historical accounts. For instance, during the Third Crusade, Richard the Lionheart's army struggled with supply issues. In 1191, while besieging the city of Acre, Richard's forces suffered from a lack of provisions and disease, which hampered their effectiveness despite their numerical strength. Another significant factor was the recruitment and maintenance of troops. Medieval armies were typically composed of feudal levies, mercenaries, and knights, each with their own logistical needs. Mustering a large force was time-consuming and expensive. For example, Edward III's army at the Battle of Crecy in 1346 consisted of around 12,000 troops, a significant force for the time, but still far from the massive armies we might imagine. Medieval armies faced the constant challenge of supply. The agricultural output during this period was limited by seasonal variations and primitive farming techniques. When armies moved, they had to rely heavily on foraging, which often led to conflicts with local populations. This was evident during the campaigns of the 100 Years' War, where English armies frequently resorted to the Chivorchi, raiding expeditions designed to disrupt the enemy's economy and gather supplies. The need for supplies influenced the very movement and strategy of medieval armies. The armies had to stay close to water sources and fertile lands, limiting their operational range. This was vividly illustrated during the Siege of Jerusalem in 1099. The Crusaders, after a long march through hostile territory, were desperate for food and water. Their eventual victory was as much a testament to their perseverance as it was to their military strategy. Even when supplies were available, transporting them was no small feat. Roads were often little more than dirt tracks, making the movement of supply wagons slow and arduous. This logistical nightmare meant that armies could not venture too far from their supply bases without risking starvation. The recruitment and maintenance of troops were equally challenging. Medieval armies were composed of various groups with distinct needs. Knights required armor, weapons, and horses, which were expensive to maintain. Feudal levies, on the other hand, were often poorly equipped and needed to return home after fulfilling their feudal duties. Section 2: Size of medieval armies. Many battles were fought with surprisingly small numbers. The Battle of Hastings in 1066, one of the most famous medieval battles, saw approximately 7,000 to 8,000 men on each side. The Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, where Robert the Bruce secured Scottish independence, involved around 6,000 Scots against a larger, but not overwhelmingly. Logistics weren't the only limiting factor. The terrain also played a crucial role. Medieval Europe was dotted with forests, rivers, and mountains, making it difficult to maneuver large armies. Commanders often chose battle sites based on their strategic advantages, such as narrow passes or river crossings, which favored smaller, more manageable forces. Terrain played a pivotal role in the outcomes of many battles. In the Battle of Hastings, the Saxon army positioned itself on a hill, giving them a defensive advantage. The Normans had to fight uphill, which was a significant disadvantage. However, William the Conqueror used feigned retreats to draw the Saxons off the hill, breaking their formation and securing victory. The Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297 is another perfect example. William Wallace's smaller Scottish force used the narrow bridge to their advantage, defeating a larger English army. This battle highlights how terrain and strategy were often more important than sheer numbers. Medieval commanders also had to consider the social and political context. Feudal obligations meant that soldiers were often part-time warriors, farmers, or craftsmen who couldn't be away from their homes for extended periods. This limited the duration and size of campaigns. Additionally, many battles were fought over local disputes, involving only the forces of a few lords or cities. Historical records, such as the accounts of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle or the writings of chroniclers like Froissart, provide insight into these smaller-scale conflicts. For instance, the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 involved King Harold II's forces of about 15,000 men facing the Viking army led by Harald Hardrada, numbering around 9,000. Despite the intensity of the battle, these numbers were relatively modest compared to later historical conflicts. Medieval warfare was thus characterized by smaller, highly strategic engagements. Commanders focused on the effectiveness and morale of their troops rather than sheer numbers. The emphasis was on tactical prowess, leadership, and the ability to adapt to changing conditions on the battlefield. Section 4. Detailed Battle Analysis. Even larger battles, like Agincourt in 1415, where Henry VI's English army of around 6,000 men defeated a much larger French force, demonstrate how strategic positioning and innovative tactics, such as the use of longbowmen, could overcome numerical disadvantages. To gain a deeper understanding, let's examine some of these battles in greater detail, beginning with the Battle of Hastings. This pivotal conflict in 1066 saw the forces of William the Conqueror, numbering about 7,000 to 8,000, face King Harold II's similarly sized army. The battle's outcome hinged on strategy and endurance rather than overwhelming numbers. William's use of feigned retreats to break the Saxon shield wall was a masterstroke. Harold's forces, though holding the high ground, were drawn into pursuing the Normans, leading to their eventual defeat. This battle exemplifies how tactical ingenuity and disciplined execution were critical in medieval warfare. Next, let's revisit the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Robert the Bruce's smaller Scottish army, estimated at around 6,000 men, faced a much larger English force under King Edward II, possibly numbering 20,000. The Scots' strategic use of the terrain and schiltron formations, a tightly packed group of pikemen, allowed them to withstand and repel the English cavalry. Bruce's choice of a marshy battlefield nullified the English advantage in cavalry. The English were forced into narrow, difficult terrain, making their numbers less effective. The victory at Bannockburn was a testament to Bruce's strategic acumen and the Scots' discipline and morale. The Battle of Agincourt in 1415 offers another compelling study. Henry V's English force of about 6,000 faced a French army that some estimates put at around 20,000 to 30,000. Despite being outnumbered, the English won decisively. Henry's strategic use of the terrain, a narrow, muddy field flanked by woods, along with the devastating effectiveness of the English longbowmen, played crucial roles. The French, heavily armored and advancing through the mud, were decimated by arrows before they could reach the English lines. The battle highlighted the importance of innovative tactics and the effective use of available technology. These examples illustrate a broader trend in medieval warfare: the importance of strategy, terrain, and effective leadership over sheer numbers. Commanders had to be resourceful, adapting to the constraints and opportunities presented by each unique situation. This often meant that battles involved fewer troops than the massive armies depicted in popular media. Another factor to consider is the composition of medieval armies. Unlike modern professional armies, medieval forces were often a mix of feudal levies, knights and their retinues, who were obligated to serve for a set period, alongside mercenaries and local militias. This mix affected the size and composition of armies, as well as their logistical needs and effectiveness. Feudal obligations meant that many soldiers were part-time warriors, returning to their fields or trades once their service period ended. This limited the ability to maintain large standing armies and influenced the size and duration of campaigns. Additionally, the cost of warfare, funding troops, supplies, and equipment was a significant burden on medieval rulers, further constraining army sizes. Medieval chroniclers, like Froissart, often romanticized battles, focusing on the heroism of knights and the drama of combat. However, a closer examination of contemporary records and archaeological evidence reveals the more modest and practical realities of medieval warfare. The Battle of Poitiers in 1356, for instance, saw an English force of about 6,000 to 7,000 men defeat a much larger French army, using terrain and tactical innovations like the English longbow to their advantage. In summary, the relatively small size of medieval battles comes down to a combination of logistical constraints, strategic considerations, terrain, and the socio-political structure of the time. Understanding these factors helps us appreciate the complexity and nuance of medieval warfare. It wasn't about sheer numbers, but about effectiveness and efficiency on the battlefield. What are your thoughts on medieval warfare? Did any of these insights surprise you? Share them in the comments below. And if you enjoy historical insights like this, don't forget to subscribe to Medieval Chronicles 1066 for more content. Thanks for watching.